Today I'm going to tell you the story of Emma Walsh, a young woman who endured daily beatings from her stepfather for years. When rancher Caleb Matthews saw her limping toward his gate, bruised and desperate, his decision to help her would transform both their lives forever. But you have to hear what happened next. Please subscribe to our channel and comment where you're listening to this story from. The Girl at the Gate. The Montana Territory's sun was beginning its descent behind the rugged peaks of the Rocky Mountains when rancher Caleb Matthews first spotted her limping along the dusty road that led to his property. From his position on the front porch of sprawling ranch house, he could see the figure moving slowly, unsteadily, toward the wooden gate that marked the entrance to his land. At 45, Caleb had the weathered good looks of a man who had spent decades working under the open sky. His dark hair was touched with silver at the temple, his strong jaw covered with several days' worth of stubble, and his piercing blue eyes held the wisdom that came from years of hard-earned experience. Something about the way the figure moved caught his attention immediately. It wasn't the confident stride of someone simply passing through, nor the purposeful gait of a traveler with a destination in mind. This was the painful, halting movement of someone who was hurt, and Caleb's instincts, honed by years of caring for injured livestock and helping neighbors in distress, told him that whoever was approaching his gate needed help. Setting down the cup of coffee he had been enjoying in the cool evening air, Caleb stood and walked to the edge of his porch for a better view. What he saw made his breath catch his throat, and his jaw clench with an anger that surprised him with intensity. The figure was a young woman, probably no more than 20 years old, with long auburn hair that caught the dying light like spun copper. Even from a distance he could see that she was beautiful, the kind of natural, understated beauty that didn't need fancy dresses or elaborate hairstyles to make a man's heart skip a beat. But it was her condition that made Caleb's hands curl into fists. She was limping badly, favoring her left leg with each painful. Her simple calico dress was torn in several places, and even from where he stood, Caleb could see dark stains on the fabric that looked suspicious. Her face, though partially obscured by her disheveled hair, bore the unmistakable marks of violence. A swollen cheek, what appeared to be a blackened eye, and a split lip that had clearly been bleeding recently. Caleb didn't hesitate. Grabbing his hat from the porch railing, he strode quickly toward the gate, his long legs covering the distance in just a few minutes. As he approached, the young woman looked up at him with eyes that were a stunning shade of green, made even more vivid by the tears that threatened to spill from them. Despite the obvious pain and fear in her expression, there was something else there too, a fierce determination that spoke to an inner strength that even brutal treatment hadn't been able to break. "Miss," Caleb said gently, stopping a few feet away so as not to frighten her further, "are you all right? Do you need help?" The question was obviously unnecessary. Anyone could see that she desperately needed help, but Caleb had learned from experience that frightened people sometimes needed to be approached carefully, given the chance to accept assistance, rather than having it forced upon them. The young woman tried to speak, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again, her words carrying a slight tremor that could have been from pain, fear, or simply please, and the single word carried such a weight of desperation that it made Caleb's chest with sympathy. I don't have anywhere else to. What's your name?" His voice taking on the same tone he used to calm, skittish. "Emma," she replied, swaying slightly on her feet, as if the effort of standing becoming too much for her. "Emma Walsh." "Well, Emma Walsh," reaching out slowly to open the gate, "you're safe now. Let's get you inside and tend to those injuries." Emma looked at him with surprise, as if she hadn't expected such immediate kindness from a stranger. You don't know me," she said. "You don't know what I might have done. Why, I know you're hurt," Caleb interrupted firmly. "I know you're scared, and I know that whatever happened to you, you didn't deserve it. That's all I need to know right now." The simple declaration seemed to break something inside Emma, and the tears that had been threatening finally spilled over. She took a step forward, then stumbled as her injured leg gave out beneath her. Caleb moved quickly, catching her before she could fall, and the contact sent an unexpected jolt through his system. Even battered and bruised, Emma Walsh was one of the most beautiful women he had ever seen. Her skin, where it wasn't marked by violence, was smooth and creamy pale. Her auburn hair was thick and lustrous despite its current disheveled state, and her figure, even beneath the torn dress, spoke of a young woman in the prime of her, but it was her eyes that those remarkable green eyes that held pain and fear, but also a spirit that refused to be completely broken. Easy there, supporting her as they walked slowly toward. Just lean on. We'll take. As they made their way up the ranch house, Caleb found himself wondering what kind. The evidence of systematic abuse was written all over her body. This wasn't the result of a single incident, but rather the accumulated damage of repeated violence. Old bruises in various stages of healing were visible beneath the fresh injury, and the way she flinched when he accidentally brushed against her right arm suggested that the damage went far beyond what was immediately visible. "Who did this to you, Emma?" Caleb asked as they reached the porch steps. Emma was quiet for a moment, and Caleb could see her struggling with whether or not to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was filled with a combination of pain and bitter resignation. "My stepfather," she said simply, "Frank Dawson. He's been beating me since my mother died 2 years ago." Caleb felt his anger flare again, stronger this. He had known men like Frank Dawson, cowards who took their frustrations out on those who couldn't fight back, bullies who used their size and strength to terrorize those smaller and weaker than themselves. "Where is he now?" Caleb asked as he helped Emma into the. "Back in Millerville, I suppose," Emma. "I waited until he was drunk and passed out. Then I took what little I could carry and ran. I've been walking for 2 days." Millerville was nearly 30 miles away, a long, difficult journey on foot, even for someone who wasn't injured. The fact that Emma had managed to cover that distance in her condition spoke to both her desperation and her remarkable inner strength. Caleb led her to the main room of his house, settling her carefully into a comfortable chair near the fireplace. The ranch house was spacious and well appointed, reflecting the success Caleb had achieved in his 20 years of working this land. The furniture was solid and practical, comfortable, the walls were lined with bookshelves, and the overall atmosphere was one of masculine comfort rather than rough frontier living. "I'm going to get some supplies to clean those wounds," Caleb, studying her injuries with a practiced eye. "Then I'll fix you something to eat. When's the last time you had a proper meal?" Emma looked down at her hands, clearly embarrassed. 3 days ago, I think. Frank. He didn't like to waste money on food for me. The casual way she spoke of this made Caleb's jaw clench. He had seen poverty and hardship on the frontier, but deliberate starvation was a different kind of cruelty altogether. "Well, we'll fix that right away," forcing his voice to remain calm and reassuring. "You're safe here, Emma. No one's going to hurt you while you're under my roof." Walk. As Caleb moved around the house gathering medical supplies and preparing, he found his mind racing with questions and concerns. Emma Walsh was clearly running from an abusive situation, but her presence here would eventually raise questions from neighbors and plea from the law. Frank Dawson might come looking for her. Caleb wasn't afraid of confrontation. He knew that the situation was more complex than simply offering temporary shelter. But as he looked back at Emma, sitting quietly in his chair with her hands folded in her lap and her beautiful green eyes reflecting the firelight, Caleb knew that he couldn't turn her away. Whatever complications her presence might bring, whatever trouble might follow in her wake, he couldn't live with. He sent her back to the monster who had done this. For the first time in years, Caleb Matthews had found something worth protecting besides his land and his livestock. And as he began the process of cleaning Emma's wounds, helping her heal from the trauma she had endured, he realized that his carefully ordered, solitary life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet. The young woman who had limped to his gate that evening was going to transform his world. And despite the danger and uncertainty that lay ahead, Caleb found himself looking forward to discovering what that transformation might bring. Healing and trust. 3 days had passed since Emma Walsh had limped through Caleb's gate, and the transformation was already remarkable. The swelling around her eye had begun to subside, revealing more clearly the stunning beauty that had been hidden beneath the bruises. Her split lip was healing, and with proper food and rest, color had returned to her pale cheeks, but it was the gradual return of life to her magnificent green eyes that truly captured Caleb's attention. Emma sat in the morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, wearing one of the dresses that Caleb had purchased for her during his trip to town. The soft blue fabric complemented her auburn hair perfect and showed off her grace in a way that made Caleb's breath catch every time he looked at her. At 20 years old, Emma possessed the kind of natural beauty that could stop traffic in a busy, but it was her gentle spirit and quiet strength that truly drew him to her. "You don't have to do that," Caleb said, as he watched her carefully mending one of his shirts with delicate stitches. "You're supposed to be resting." Emma looked up at him with a small smile that transformed her face completely. "I need to feel you. You've done so much for me already. This is the least I can do to repay your kindness." Caleb poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down across from her at the kitchen table. Over the past 3 days he had grown accustomed to having her presence in his house, and he was surprised by how much he enjoyed the simple pleasure of conversation over breakfast. The sound of her humming while she worked, and the way she filled the rooms with a warmth that had nothing to do with. "Tell me about yourself, Emma," he said gently, "before Frank Dawson came into your life." Emma's hands stilled on the mending, and for a moment Caleb thought she might retreat into the shell of silence that had protected her during her first day. But then she set down the shirt and met his eye directly. "My father was a minister," she said quietly. "We lived in a small town in Kansas until I was 16. He was a good man, kind and patient. He taught me to read and write, made sure I understood that I was worth something." Her voice caught slightly. "He died of pneumonia during a particularly harsh winter." "And your mother?" "She tried to hold things together for a while, but she wasn't strong like he. When Frank Dawson came through town and started paying attention to her, she saw him as salvation." Emma's expression darkened. "He was charming at first, attentive. He convinced her to sell the house and move west with him to Montana, promising her a better life." Caleb could see where this was heading, and his jaw tightened in anticipation of what was coming next. "He showed his true nature once we were isolated," Emma continued. "Started drinking heavily, gambling away what little money we had. When my mother tried to stand up to him," she touched her cheek unconsciously, "he made it clear that violence was his way of solving problems." "How long did this go on?" 2 years before my mother died," Emma said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "She got sick, and Frank wouldn't pay for a doctor. Said it was a waste of money. She died slowly, painfully, and I couldn't do anything to help her." Caleb reached across the table and gently covered her hand with his. The contact sent a familiar jolt through his system, but more importantly, it seemed to give Emma the strength to continue. "After she died, things got worse. Frank blamed me for everything. The money problems, his drinking, his failures, and he—" She faltered, unable to finish the sentence. "He what?" Caleb asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew. "He started looking at me differently, saying things about how I owed him for keeping a roof over my, how I needed to earn my keep in ways that—" She shuddered. "I managed to avoid the worst of it, but I knew it was only a matter of time." Caleb felt a cold rage building in his chest. Frank Dawson wasn't just a man who beat a young woman. He was a predator who had been working up to something far worse. The thought of what might have happened if Emma hadn't found the courage to run made Caleb's hands clench into fists. "You were brave to leave," said firmly. "It takes incredible courage to walk away from the only life you know, even when that life is unbearable." Was terrified. Emma admitted, "I had no money, nowhere to go, no idea how I was going to survive. I just knew I couldn't stay there any longer." "What made you choose my ranch? Why didn't you go to town, seek help from the authorities?" Emma was quiet for a moment, as if considering how much to reveal. "I asked around Millerville before I left finally. People spoke highly of you. They said you were a decent man, someone who could be trusted. And—" She hesitated. "And what?" "They said you lived alone, you'd never married. I thought maybe you'd be less likely." Color rising, Caleb understood immediately. A single man might be more likely to something in return, or at least that had been Emma's desperate hope. She set out on her dangerous— "You were right to those instincts, for as long as you need to stay." The gratitude in her eyes was almost overwhelming, but there was something else there, a warmth that had nothing to do with simple appreciation of his kindness. Over the past 3 days, Caleb had caught her watching when she thought he wasn't, had noticed the way her breath caught their hand while he touched, had seen the flush that colored her cheeks when he complimented her cooking or her skill with a needle. The attraction between them was undeniable, but Caleb was careful to push or pressure her in any way. Emma had been through enough trauma without having to worry about the motivations of the man who had offered her sanctuary. "There's something else we need to discuss," reluctantly moving to a more practical. "Frank Dawson is eventually going to realize you're not coming back. He might come looking for you." Emma's face paled. She didn't look. "I know. I've been thinking of—" "Are you legally bound to him in any way? Did he adopt you, make you his ward?" No, said quickly. When he married my mother, he made it clear that I was her responsibility, not his. Legally, I think I'm free to make my own choices now that I'm 20. That's good, Caleb said. But legal rights don't always matter much on the frontier, especially when you're dealing with a man who's willing to use violence to get what he wants. What are you suggesting? Caleb was quiet, considering his words. What he was about to propose would change everything between them, would transform their relationship in ways that couldn't be undone. But as he looked at Emma's beautiful face, saw the trust and growing affection in her remarkable green eyes, he realized that he wanted that change more than he had ever wanted anything in his life. I'm suggesting that we make your presence here official. There are several ways we could do that. I could hire you as my housekeeper, give you a formal position that would make your living here perfectly respectable. And the other ways? And Caleb could hear something in her voice that made his heart. We could get married, said simply. The words hung in the air between them, and Caleb waited anxiously for Emma's return. He had known her for only 3 days, but in that short time she had become more important to him than anyone had been in years. The thought of her leaving, of returning to a world where men like Frank Dawson could hurt her, was unbearable. Caleb, Emma said, I care about you more than I should, but I don't want you to marry me out of pity or because you feel obligated to protect me. That's not why I'm asking. Reaching across the table I'm asking because in 3 days you've brought more joy and warmth into my life than I've felt in years. I'm asking because I can't imagine my days without you in them. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of happiness rather than pain. Are you sure? I come with dangers. Frank won't give up easily. Let me worry about Frank Dawson. The question is, do you think you could be happy here? Could you see yourself building a life with... Emma smiled then, the first truly radiant smile he had seen from her, and it transformed her already beautiful face into something absolutely... Yes. Oh, yeah, I think I could be... As Caleb leaned across the table to gently kiss her healing lips, he knew that his life was about to become far more complicated and infinitely more dangerous. But as he felt Emma's warm response to his touch, saw the love beginning to bloom in her magnificent eyes, he also knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The broken young woman who had limped to his gate was becoming the love of his, and Caleb was determined to make sure that Frank Dawson never hurt her. The devil comes calling. 2 weeks after Emma Walsh had accepted Caleb's proposal of marriage, their peaceful world was shattered by the arrival of Frank Dawson. The wedding had been a simple affair conducted by the circuit judge in the nearby town of Cedar Ridge, witnessed by a handful of Caleb's neighbors who had welcomed Emma with genuine warmth and acceptance. For 14 blissful days, Emma had been Emma Matthews, a married woman with a loving husband and a beautiful home, her past seemingly left behind in the dusty trails of Montana Territory. But as Caleb had warned her, men like Frank Dawson didn't give up easily. Emma was hanging laundry on behind the ranch when she heard the sound of horses. Full morning air carried the voices of multiple, and something in their tone made blood run cold with recognition and fear. She knew that voice, the rough, aggressive bark of the man who had made her life a living hell for years. Emma! Frank Dawson boomed across the ranch yard. Emma Walsh, I know you're here, girl. Time to come home. Emma's hand, she dropped the wet, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Through a gap in the laundry, 3 other men, all mounted, all armed, sitting their horses of the ranch house. Frank Dawson was exactly as she remembered him, a large, brutal-looking man in his 40s with graying hair, cold brown eyes, and the kind of cruel mouth that seemed permanently set in a sneer. Even from a distance, she could see the violent temper simmering just beneath the surface, the same dangerous energy that had terrorized for so long. Caleb Matthews, Frank shouted. I know you're in there. Come out here and face me like a man. Emma heard the front door of the house open, and her heart clenched with fear for her husband. Caleb emerged onto the porch with the calm, measured movements of a man who was prepared for trouble, intimidated by. At 45, he was still an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with a kind of quiet strength that came from years of hard work and honest living. Frank Dawson, I presume, Caleb said, carrying easily. You're trespassing on my property. Frank's laughter was harsh. Your property? That's rich, man. You got something that belongs to me, and I want her back. I don't have anything that belongs to you, but I do have a wife who's under my protection. Wife? Frank's. You mean that little whore, Emma Walsh? She ain't your wife, Matthews. She's my property, bought and paid for when I married her worthless mother. Emma flinched, the crude language, but she could see the dangerous tension in Caleb's posture as Frank's words hit their mark. Emma Matthews is my legal wife, his voice remaining steady to see anger Emma could see building in his eye. Married 2 weeks ago by Judge Harrison in Cedar Ridge. If you have a problem with that, you can take it up with the territorial courts. Courts? You think I give a damn about courts? That girl's been eating my food, sleeping under my roof for years. She owes me, and I'm here to collect. The only thing Emma owes you is a charge of assault and battery, Caleb. I've seen what you did to her, Dawson. The bruises, the cuts, the fear in her eyes. You're lucky I don't have you arrested on spot. Frank's face darkened. You don't know nothing about what that girl needed, Matt. She was wild, disobedient, needed a firm hand to keep her in line. What she needed, protection from animals like you. The insult hung in the air for a moment, and Emma could see Frank's hands moving toward his gun belt. Her heart raced with terror as she realized that this confrontation would turn violent. Frank, one of the other riders, a thin man with nervous eyes, spoke for time. Maybe we should just leave. The girl's married now, legal and all. Ain't worth getting into a shooting match over. Shut up, Pete, Frank snarled. I didn't ride 30 miles to leave empty-handed. He turned his attention back to Caleb. I'll make you a deal, Matt. Give me the girl, and I'll forget about the theft. What theft? She took money from me when she ran, Frank said with a cruel smile. $50 from my strong box. That's grand theft, Matt. Enough to see her hanged if I press charges. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She had taken money, $5 that she had found in Frank's, barely enough to buy food for her journey, but she knew that Frank would have no qualms about lying to get what he wanted. I don't believe you, said flatly. Don't matter what you believe, Frank replied. I got witnesses. My boys here will swear they saw her take it. The other 3 men nodded in agreement, and Emma realized that Frank had come prepared for this confrontation. Even if that were true, it would be a matter for the sheriff, not for you to handle personally. Ain't no sheriff within 50 miles of here, Frank said with satisfaction. Out here, a man handles his own justice. Emma could see that the situation was spiraling toward violence, and she couldn't bear the thought of Caleb being hurt because of her. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out from behind the laundry line and walked toward the group of men. Hello, Frank, she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. Frank's eyes lit up with vicious satisfaction when he saw her. There's my girl, looking mighty fine, Emma. Marriage agrees with you. I'm not your girl anymore, Emma. I'm Mrs. Matthews now. We'll see about that, Frank said, dismounting from his horse. You're coming home with me, Emma, right now. No, Emma, I'm never going anywhere with you again. Frank's face twisted with rage. You ungrateful little bitch. After everything I'd done for you, this is how you repay me? Everything you did for me? Emma's voice rose with her own anger. You mean the beatings? The threats? The way you looked at me like I was something you could use and throw away? You needed, Frank growled, and you're going to get it when I get you home. That's enough, said stepping protectively. You're not taking her anywhere, Dawson. This conversation is over. The hell it is, Frank snarled, his hand dropping to his gun. I'm not leaving without what's mine. The tension in the air was electric, and Emma could see that Frank was preparing to draw his weapon. She knew her stepfather well enough to understand that he was beyond reason now, driven by rage and the need to reassert his control over Caleb, she whispered urgently. He's going to... Frank's hand moved toward his gun, but Caleb was faster. In one smooth motion he drew his Colt .45 and had it trained on Frank's chest before the older man could clear leather. I wouldn't, his voice carrying a deadly calm that made even Frank pause. I've been patient with you out of respect for the fact that you're Emma's stepfather, but my patience has limits. Frank's eyes darted to his companions, clearly calculating his chances. But Caleb's reputation as a marksman was well known in the territory, and even Frank wasn't foolish enough to test him when he already had the drop. This ain't over, Matthews, Frank said finally, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. That girl belongs to me, and I'll get her back one way or another. If you come onto my property again, his gun never wavering, I'll kill you. That's not a threat, Dawson. That's a promise. Frank stared at him for a long moment, then spat in the dirt and turned back to his horse. Come on, boys, he said to his companions. We're done here for now. As the 4 men rode away, Emma sagged against Caleb relief. But even as her husband's strong arms wrapped around her, she knew that Frank's parting words were more than just bluster. He would be back, and next time he would be prepared. It's all right, Caleb. He's gone. For now, Emma whispered. But he'll be back, Caleb. Frank doesn't give up when he wants. Then we'll be ready for him. Caleb's. I meant what I said. I won't let him hurt you again. As they stood together on the porch, watching the dust cloud raised by Frank's departure, Emma knew that their brief period of peace was over. The war for her freedom was just beginning, and the man she loved was now standing directly in the line of fire. Love conquers all. 6 months had passed since Frank Dawson's threatening visit to the Matthews, and life had settled into a rhythm of Emma had confident, radiant woman under Caleb's patient love. Her bruises had long since healed, leaving behind only the memory of and the strength that came from. At 20 years old, she had grown into her beauty fully. Her auburn hair now shone with health and vitality, her green eyes sparkled with joy and contentment, and her graceful figure had filled out with proper nutrition and the security of knowing she was loved, cherished. Caleb watched his wife from the kitchen window as she tended to their vegetable garden, marveling at the transformation love had wrought in both of them. At 45, he felt younger and more alive than he had in years. Marriage to Emma had brought purpose and meaning to his life that he had never experienced, even during his earlier bachelor years. She was not just beautiful, though her beauty still took his breath away every morning when he woke up, but intelligent, funny, and possessed of a quiet strength that had only grown stronger as she healed from her past. The ranch had prospered during their months together, partly due to Emma's careful management of their household finances and her skill at turning their home into a place of warmth and welcome that drew neighbors and friends. But more importantly, they had built something together that neither Frank Dawson nor anyone else could destroy. A marriage based on mutual respect, genuine affection, and a love that had deepened with each passing day. "Caleb," Emma called from outside, her voice carrying a note of excitement that made him smile. "Come see how big the tomatoes are getting." He was wiping his hands on a dish towel and preparing to join her when the sound of approaching horses reached his ears. Multiple riders moving fast, and something about the urgency of their approach set off alarm bells in his mind. Moving quickly to the front window, Caleb peered out and felt his blood run cold. Frank Dawson was back, but this time he wasn't alone with just 3 companions. At least 8 men sat their horses in his front yard, all armed, all wearing the hard faces of men who had come for trouble. "Emma," Caleb called urgently, "get in the house, now." She must have heard something in his voice that warned her of danger, because she dropped her gardening tools and ran toward the back door without question. Within seconds, she was beside him at the window, her face paling as she took in the army. "Frank Dawson," the familiar voice boomed across the ranch yard. "I told you that. Come out here and face justice." Caleb quickly moved to his gun cabinet, pulling out his Winchester rifle and checking the loads in his... "Emma, I want you to go to the bedroom and lock the door. If anything happens to..." "No." Moving to... "I'm not hiding while you face this alone. We're in this together, Caleb." Before he could argue, Frank's voice rang out again. "Matthews, I got a warrant here for Emma Walsh's arrest. She's wanted for theft and assault. You got 1 minute to send her out, or we're coming in." Caleb looked at Emma, seeing the fear in her beautiful green eyes, but also the determination that carried her so much already. "He's bluffing about the warrant," said quietly. "Even if he had one, he'd need a proper law officer to serve it. What do we do?" Caleb was quiet for a moment, considering their option. 8 armed men against 2 was impossible odds, even with the advantage of fighting from inside the house. But surrender wasn't an option either. He knew what Frank would do to Emma if he got his hands on her. "Time's up, Matthews," Frank shouted. "Boys, surround the house. If they won't come out, we'll smoke them out." But before Frank's men could move into position, the sound of more horses reached them, this time approaching the east. Caleb looked out the side window and felt a surge of hope and relief. Sheriff Tom Bradley from Cedar Ridge was riding hard toward the ranch, accompanied by 2 deputies and what looked like a territorial marshal. "Well, well," Caleb murmured. "Looks like someone called in the real law." "We," Frank's voice carried an uncertainty. "What the hell?" "Frank Dawson," Sheriff Bradley's voice cut across the yard with unmistakable authority. "You and your men are trespassing on private property. Dismount and drop your weapons." "Sheriff Bradley," Frank called back, trying to regain his composure. "Good timing. I'm here to arrest a fugitive." "The only fugitive I see here is you," Bradley replied, dismounting with his deputies. "Frank Dawson, you're under arrest for kidnapping, assault, battery, and attempted extortion." Emma gasped beside Caleb. "How did they?" Mrs. Patterson in town, Caleb said with a grin. I sent word to her weeks ago about what Frank had done to you. She has a sister who works for the territorial government. Apparently, they've been building a case against him. Outside, Frank was sputtering with outrage. This is ridiculous. That girl is my property. She stole from me. Emma Matthews is a legal citizen and a married woman, the territorial marshal spoke for his time, and we have testimony from 3 different sources about your treatment. You're in serious trouble, Dawson. The confrontation that followed was swift and decisive. Faced with real legal authority and overwhelmed by the evidence against him, Frank's hired guns quickly abandoned him. Within minutes, Frank Dawson was in shackles. His reign of terror finally ended. Sheriff Bradley approached the house as Caleb and Emma emerged onto the porch. Mr. and Mrs. Matthews, he said with a tip of his hat, sorry for the disturbance. We've been tracking Dawson for weeks, following up on reports of activity. What will happen to us? Unconsciously moving closer to Caleb's protective presence. He'll stand trial in the territorial court. Between the testimony we've gathered and the evidence of his recent activities, he's looking at a long prison sentence. You'll be called to testify, but after that, you should never have to worry about him again. As the law officers led Frank Dawson away in chains, Emma turned to her husband with tears of relief and gratitude in her beautiful green eye. It's really over? It's really over, Caleb confirmed, pulling her into his arms. Your Frank Dawson will never hurt you again. 1 year later, Emma Matthews stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching her husband work with their new horses in the corral. Her hand rested protectively over her gently rounded belly, where their first child grew strong and healthy. Frank Dawson was serving a 20-year sentence in the territorial prison, and the shadow of fear that had hung over their marriage was finally gone. Caleb, she called out, her voice carrying the same note of joy that had been there since the day Frank was arrested. Supper's ready, as her handsome husband walked toward her, his face lighting up with the love that still took her breath away. Emma reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. She had limped to his gate, a broken, terrified young woman with nothing but the clothes on her back and the hope that someone might show her kindness. She had found so much more than kindness. She had found love, protection, purpose, and a future that stretched ahead of them. How are you feeling? He climbed the porch, his eyes automatically moving to her pregnancy, protective concern that never left. Perfect, Emma replied, meaning it completely, absolutely. As they walked into their home together, hand in hand, Emma knew that the scared girl who had fled from Frank Dawson was gone forever. In her place stood a confident, a beloved wife, and soon to be a mother, surrounded by love and protected by a man who had proven that true strength came not from violence and intimidation, but from gentleness, patience, and the courage to stand up for what was. Their love story had begun with violence and fear, but it would continue with joy, peace, and the kind of happiness that could only come from 2 people who had found exactly what they needed in each other.